Ayubowan, Vanakkam, Namaskar. It is indeed a momentous day today. At the beginning, short while ago, the reference was made to the Vesak, the beginning of the Vesak week. An Honorable Minister also mentioned about starting the week-long Vesak celebrations. A few days ago, last month, hundreds of millions of people in our part of the world, in the subcontinent, have welcomed the Sinhala New Year, Avarutu, have welcomed the Tamil New Year, Uttandu, have welcomed the Assami New Year, Bangla New Year, Pahilo Boshak, Keralite New Year, Malayali New Year, Vihu, Punjabi New Year, Baisakhi, and of course, celebrated Easter, commemorated Easter, and celebrated the festival of Eid al-Fitr. This is therefore seems to be the right time for us to mark, celebrate, and devote ourselves to journey not only outside us, but also inside us. And what better time to do this than Vesak? Literally on the eve of the auspicious day, just 2 days ago, 2 days away. And that festival, as we all know, Vesak, is just not a festival. It's just not a historical date, but it is the date which I would say has triple significance for the triple gem. Buddha's life, 3 of the most important events in the Buddha's life, and his enunciation of his enlightenment, his sermon, then Dhamma, Sangha. So that day, Vesak, is just round the corner. Immediately after this program, we will be going to Ganga Ramaya temple, where the Honorable President of Sri Lanka will be launching the celebrations by signifying what is known as the Vesak Kalapaya, which is the demarking the zone, and where, along with many other countries which share the Buddhist heritage, India also has the privilege to put up an exhibition of its Buddhist heritage that we share with this beautiful country and our closest friend and maritime neighbor, Sri Lanka. That is the same place, most venerables, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, where 6 years ago, Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi was with the current president when he was the Prime Minister to launch the Vesak celebrations. And I remember that date vividly because I happened to be part of the delegation of the Prime Minister at that time in a very different capacity. So today, standing here in front of you to speak about Theravāda Buddhism and modern governance, I think I feel an immense sense of honor. And this honor, because it's not only an invitation to me as the High Commissioner, but it is also an honor for my country, India, that at the very beginning of the Vesak celebrations in this important land where Buddha's teachings are just not confined to scriptures or textbooks, but they are a way of life. As India's High Commissioner, I have been extended the invitation to come and share my thoughts with you on this topic. It is India, as has been said. Of course, some questions were also mentioned in that regard, but let us keep those questions aside for now and believe in what Buddha asked us to believe in what we know and what we can know. So India, the country from where the light of Buddha's teachings went to all over the world, not only to Sri Lanka, but to the west, to the east, far east, north, over centuries, over millennia. And that is the place, India, as I will speak in a short while, which is also at the forefront of the effort to renew the world's faith in the path shown by the Buddha more than 2,500 years ago. Many of you would be aware that last month, on 20th April, the Prime Minister of India, Shri Narendra Modi, inaugurated the first Global Buddhist Conference. That is part of the efforts, part of our way, as I said, to draw once again the world's attention to the relevance of Buddha's teaching, not merely to the governance, but many other challenges that the world is facing today. But honor is not the only sentiment I feel. Of course, I feel gratitude for the invitation. I feel pride because I share this heritage with this beautiful country and our friends and brothers and sisters. But I must also say that I feel a little intimidated and hesitant. I feel hesitant, particularly because I have to speak to this distinguished gathering, and I am neither a scholar nor a practicing Buddhist. And on top of it, speaking in the august presence of so many venerables who not only have embodied, assimilated, internalized the teachings of Buddha, but exist for showing the rest of the world the Buddha's path, why won't it be intimidating? I won't describe it as carrying coal to Newcastle, but I would say that it is something like speaking to practicing, experienced doctors about medical science. But I also feel confident and comforted. I feel comforted because of your magnanimity, your generosity, and your kindness to bear with my shortcomings that may creep in despite my best intentions. And I feel confident because, as I said, I represent here the heritage which is thousands of years old and which connects our two countries like an umbilical cord. The two countries, India and Sri Lanka, which are just not fraternal, closest neighbors and friends, but as I often say, civilizational twins. The country that many Sri Lankans, even in the ancient times, they know it as Dambadiva or Jambudvipa, as we say in Hindi or Sanskrit. So coming from such a heritage does give me a bit of confidence in to believe that I will not make a total mess of the responsibility given to me by my good friend, none other than the Honorable Minister, Dr. Surendra. Before I proceed to speak on the topics, I would also like to very gratefully and humbly acknowledge that in my modest presentation, I would respectfully cite from the works of His Holiness, the 14th Dalai Lama, Bhikkhuni Thupten Chodron, Venerable Dr. Valpola Rahula, and many other Buddhist scholars and writers, research scholars, people who write in newspapers, media, magazines, and also speeches from our own Prime Minister, my own Prime Minister, Shri Narendra Modi. And I will take the liberty of paraphrasing their profound ideas and views. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I would conduct this talk broadly in 4 segments. First, I would recall, though it doesn't need to be recalled to this audience, but I would recall because of the relevance, the fundamentals of the teachings of Buddha. Then, I would like to dwell briefly on the direct references to economy, some of the direct references to economy, social thought, and political thought in Buddha's teachings. I would then like to speak about India's experience, and finally, what challenges our world faces and how Buddhism is relevant. I think, as I said earlier, this audience, most people here would, I presume, be practicing Buddhists. And of course, we see the venerables among us. So it is very trivial for me to speak about the triple gem, about the four sublime states or Brahma Viharas or Apamanas, Metta, Karuna, Mudita and Upekka, or the five percepts, the Panchashila of not to kill, not to lie, not to indulge in intoxication or sexual misconduct, and not to take more than what is given. Or indeed the eightfold path of right understanding, right thought, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. But I'm compelled to mention these just to point out one simple fact. And that simple fact is that these teachings pertain to practice by individuals. But nevertheless, the conduct of the individual, the discipline of the individual, and ultimately the inner journey of the individual becomes the building block for the whole society. Without these practices, without this discipline, social order can face breakdown and can also face the threat of anarchy. Buddha put individual and their happiness at the center of his teachings. But at the same time, he situated the life in its social and economic background, looked at it as a whole, in all its social, economic and political dimensions. Indeed, the Buddha regarded economic welfare necessary for human happiness. Although for him, true progress would not be only material, nor it should be devoid of a spiritual and moral foundation. Speaking of the economy, we all know the story, or the satisfying the material needs. We all know the story that when somebody hungry came to Buddha and his disciples wanted him to be sermonized, the person was not ready to eat, not willing to listen. He wanted to eat, and Buddha told his disciples to first feed the person. Then only he can be amenable to listening to the teachings or the thoughts or sermon. This broader aspect of satisfaction of the material needs is very well captured at several places, and I would just mention one of them in the Digha Nikaya, Chakravarti Singhanada Sutta, which mentions where the Buddha taught that poverty is the cause of immorality and crimes. He suggested that in order to eradicate crime, economic condition of the people should be improved, grain and other facilities for agriculture should be provided for traders, and those engaged in business, adequate wages should be paid to those who are employed. I have taken this from the work of Dr. Valpola Rahul. So we see, ladies and gentlemen, how while focusing on the individual's happiness and his journey, the Buddha's teachings make it a central point for the well-being of the entire society. And that's where the importance of the Sangha also comes in. Because the Buddha's teachings and the Noble Eightfold Path are meant for all without distinction of any kind. The Sangha or the order provides opportunity for those who are willing to devote their lives, like the venerables here, not only to their own spiritual and intellectual development, but also to the service of others. The ideas and teachings of Buddha regarding Sangha imply that they encompass all. They are meant for all. Their benefits are not just for individual, but for the collective. The Buddha said, and here my pronunciation in Pali of course may not be perfect, Sukha Sanghasa Samagi Samaganam Tapo Sukha. Happiness lies in the unity between the unions. There is happiness in living together with the people. And let me now come to some very specific political thoughts of Buddha. The Dhammapada Jataka records how the Buddha directed his attention to the problem of good governance. He enunciated what I would say are the 10 commandments or the 10 duties of the king. Thus Raja Dhamma, Honorable Minister spoke about. And here, of course, the king does not mean literally the king or the head of state or head of government, but literally everyone who is associated with government, part of the government, or associated with the business of governance. As you all know, I don't need to go into the detail of the 10 duties, but I would just mention, to recapitulate, the 10 duties are Dana, Shila, Parichaga, Ajava, Vaddava, Tapa, Akodha, Avihimsa, Khanti, and Avirodha. Again, I apologize for an imperfect Pali pronunciation, but I am sure you all know what these terms mean. Most important here is that Buddha sees those who are entrusted with the responsibility of government. He sees them as necessarily having these attributes. Not anyone and everyone can or should become, in the Buddha's view, can or should hold the responsibility of governing the country or the society. There are many other instances, including in the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, where the Buddha has directly or indirectly or contextually given his guidance regarding governance. This distinguished audience would also be familiar with Sapta Aparihani Dhamma, the 7 conditions of welfare, which include allowing freedom of assembly, not imposing rules by the rulers on masses, which can create problems. Rulers should themselves not break rules. They should respect elders, teachers, seek their advice, protect women and children. This is very important. Protect women and children, protect religious sites, religious teachers and scholars, and help them. There are also the duties enjoined on the king to protect the army, to protect fellow royals, to protect nobles, citizens, venerables, and safeguard, again very important, safeguard environment and wildlife and protect the poor. And I will come to these specific aspects a little later. Another important point in which a whole theory of jurisprudence, whole body of jurisprudence exists in the modern legal textbooks on law, whether the justice should be restitutive or punitive. And see what Buddha had to say. Rather than emphasizing power and punishment, Buddha stressed 4 ways of treating subjects. They are dana or charity, priyavachana or kind speech, arthacharya or the spirit of frugality and of service, and of samanatmata or equality. We all often say that example is better than precept, and leaders should lead by example. We say this, of course, for our cricket teams also. But even in the ancient times, in India, the stories of Panchatantra or Jataka tales that are very familiar in this part of the world also contain any number of instances. Of course, they are stories, but they relate to real lives. One of them is the story about a king called Umma Dayanti, who saw a beautiful woman and fell in love with her. But to his misfortune, the lady was already married. He felt very ashamed that he had such thoughts about a married woman. But it so happened that the woman's husband, out of the deference for the ruler, offered his wife to the king and said if he wished, he could keep the wife as a concubine. But look at the response of the king, what he said. He said, if I should lack the power of ruling my own self, say into what condition would I bring the people who long for protection from my side? Thus, considering and regarding the good of my subjects, my own righteousness and my spotless fame, I do not allow myself to submit to my passion. I am the leader of my subjects, the bull of my herd. I have to lead with example. I am not explicitly mentioning it, but most of these things are relevant in the context of when we are talking of governance in the present day. Leading by example. As I mentioned a little while earlier, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, there are a number of parallels in the Indian system, in other traditions of Indian thought. Of course, Buddha's teachings, also his sermons, as we know, were in India, the codification, the writing down, then later on, of course, in Sri Lanka also, at other places as well. But in the other traditions in India, in other scriptures, there are a number of parallels. For example, most of you would have heard of Kautilya's Arthashastra. Arthashastra is a seminal book, I would say, which not only reflects the condition of society and polity and the political structure and economy at that time, artha meaning economy, money, but it prescribes what should be done, what should not be done in what type of situations, and specifically deals with Rajniti, or how the politics has to be conducted. In that context, Kautilya said that the king should be intelligent, persevering, dexterous, eloquent, energetic, bold, amicable, and not get excited by hatred or enmity towards others. So these, I would say, are parallel traditions which put emphasis, which put value on morality, which put value on your internal strengths to be a leader. If you are to aspire to be a leader, these are the qualities you must have. I would also mention, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, that similar to the concept of metta and karuna, we all know what they mean. Scriptures, other scriptures in India also prescribed, also spoke about well-being of others, contributing to well-being of others. As many of you know, there are 18 major Puranas in India. And about that there is a shloka, I will say it in Sanskrit and then try to render it in English. Ashtadash Puraneshu Vyasasya Vachanadvayam. Vyas is supposed to be the author. So in 18 Puranas, Vyas is saying only two things. Vyasasya Vachanadvayam, only two things. What are those two things? Paropkar Punyaya Papaya Parpidna. Doing good to others. Paropkar Punyaya, that earns you merit, that earns you good deeds. Papaya Parpidna. If you are harming others, if you are creating pain, literally, parpida, pain for others, then that is a sin. Compare it with the teaching of Buddha. Our metta, our compassion, our universal love, our limitless love extends to everyone, not just human beings, not just the beings, everything that exists. We do not know exactly when the Puranas were written. Some people say a few centuries before Christ, some people say over a period of time after the Christ. But more than 1500 years later, see what Tulsidas, who wrote Ramcharitmanas in the north, has to say. Same thing, in Avdi language. Parhit saris dharim nahi bhai, par pida sam nahi atmai. There is no other religion in the world greater than doing good to others, and there is no greater sin in the world than to hurt the others purposefully, intentionally. I am mentioning this just to say that these parallels actually have reinforced this interaction between our two countries, India and Sri Lanka. I mentioned upekka, equanimity, samatva. If I could sum up the whole philosophy of Srimad Bhagavad Gita in one sentence, it is creating this samatva as a permanent state, equanimity as a permanent state within us. That is the message. Shri Krishna, when he is giving this revelation to Arjuna on the battlefield, he says, one of the part of the shloka is samatvam yogam uchyate. The whole definition of yoga is cultivation of equanimity. And in practical terms, how does it come about? I would again recite another shloka to you. This is from Niti Shatak. Many of the venerables would know about this. Niti Shatak is a collection of 100 shlokas attributed to the Rishi Bhartari.
You're watching the Lifetraveler channel.